Imagine this. Not today, not even 1,000 years ago, but nearly 50,000 years in the past. There were no cities, no electricity, no roads, no books, no written history to tell us what people were thinking. The sun had already disappeared behind the horizon. A cold wind moved through the wilderness as a small tribe gathered around a fire. That fire was everything. It kept dangerous animals away. It cooked their food. It gave them warmth. And most importantly, it kept them alive through the darkness. As the flames danced, thick smoke slowly drifted into the night sky. Everyone sitting around that fire breathed it in without even thinking about it. It was simply part of everyday life. But one day, something unusual may have happened. Someone noticed that not every kind of smoke felt the same. Some plants produced a different smell when they burned, and somehow their smoke seemed to create a different feeling. Maybe it brought a strange sense of calm. Maybe it caused vivid dreams. Or maybe it made the world feel just a little different than before. And in that very moment, a simple question may have changed human history forever. What if I breathed this smoke on purpose? That single thought could have marked the beginning of one of humanity's oldest behaviors. But here's the surprising part. This story doesn't begin with tobacco. In fact, tobacco entered human history much later. Humanity's relationship with smoke is far older than most people realize. To understand where it all began, we have to travel back almost 1 million years, when our ancient ancestors first learned how to control fire. Fire completely transformed human life. It allowed people to cook food, stay warm during freezing nights, and protect themselves from dangerous predators. But fire also introduced something else into everyday life: smoke. Every single day, every single night, our ancestors lived surrounded by it. Breathing smoke wasn't a choice, it was simply part of survival. But forests contained much more than just trees. They were filled with thousands of different plants. Whenever some of those plants accidentally burned, their natural chemicals mixed with the smoke. Today, science tells us that certain plants contain compounds capable of affecting the human brain and nervous system. Of course, ancient people knew nothing about chemistry. They only understood what they could experience. If burning a particular plant made them feel different, they remembered it. And that's exactly what humans have always done best. We observe, we learn, and we pass that knowledge on to the next generation. This is why many anthropologists believe intentional smoke inhalation may have begun long before civilization itself. We don't have written records from that time, but we do understand human nature. Humans are naturally curious. We experiment, we notice patterns. We repeat whatever seems to work. Perhaps it all started by pure accident, but after experiencing the same result again and again, that accident slowly became tradition. Which brings us back to our original question. When did ancient humans actually start smoking? The truth is, there may never be a single date or a single person who started it all. Instead, what we see is a long journey from discovering fire to understanding nature, to passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Maybe smoking wasn't invented overnight. Maybe it evolved slowly over thousands of years, driven by nothing more than one of humanity's greatest strengths: curiosity. And that's exactly what makes this story so fascinating.
As time passed, humans learned much more than simply how to keep a fire burning. They began to understand nature itself. Little by little, they discovered which plants could be eaten, which ones were poisonous, and which ones could help treat illness. During that long process, they may have noticed something else. Not all smoke was the same. When certain plants burned, the smoke seemed to affect both the body and the mind in different ways. Of course, none of this knowledge was written down. There were no books, no scientists, no laboratories. Everything was passed from one generation to the next through stories, experience, and observation. But here's the biggest challenge we face today. We have very little direct evidence from that time. Why? Because wood, leaves, and dried plants simply don't survive for thousands of years underground. Stone tools can last for millions of years, but a wooden pipe filled with dried herbs would eventually disappear completely. That's exactly why archaeologists struggle to find the earliest evidence of smoking. So, the absence of evidence doesn't necessarily mean it never happened. It simply means time erased most of the proof. Even so, a few remarkable discoveries have completely changed our understanding. In the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, archaeologists uncovered nearly 2,500-year-old burial sites containing ancient wooden braziers with burned cannabis residue. These weren't ordinary campfires. The evidence suggests they were used during important ceremonies and rituals. By that point in history, at least some societies were deliberately burning specific plants and inhaling the smoke. But the story doesn't stop there. An ancient Greek historian named Herodotus recorded something even more fascinating. He described the Scythians, a nomadic people who lived across the Eurasian steppe. According to his writings, they built small enclosed tents, heated large stones until they were glowing hot, threw hemp seeds onto those stones, and filled the entire space with thick smoke. Then they celebrated with loud shouts of joy. For centuries, many historians believed Herodotus had exaggerated the story, but modern archaeology told a different story. When researchers excavated Scythian burial sites, they discovered the same heated stones, the same ritual vessels, and traces of hemp exactly as Herodotus had described. His account wasn't fiction, it was history. Now let's talk about tobacco. Today, when most people think about smoking, tobacco is probably the first thing that comes to mind. But here's something many people don't realize. Tobacco is native to the Americas. For thousands of years, people living in Europe, Asia, and Africa had never even seen a tobacco plant. Everything changed in 1492 when European explorers reached the Americas. For the first time, they witnessed indigenous people intentionally smoking dried tobacco leaves. To the Europeans, it looked completely unfamiliar, but for the indigenous communities, tobacco was never just a recreational habit, it was sacred. It played an important role in religious ceremonies, healing rituals, important agreements, and spiritual traditions. Many believed the smoke carried prayers to the spiritual world and created a connection between people and the divine. Because of that, tobacco was treated with respect, discipline, and purpose. At the very same time, civilizations in other parts of the world were using smoke for completely different reasons. Ancient Egypt, India, Greece, and China all recorded medical practices involving the inhalation of herbal smoke. Today, that idea may sound strange, but their reasoning was actually quite simple. If a medicinal plant could help the lungs or throat, delivering it directly through the airways seemed logical. In many ways, modern inhalers and nebulizers still follow that same principle, although today they deliver carefully controlled medicine instead of smoke. By now, one thing had become clear. Smoke was no longer just a byproduct of fire. Across many ancient civilizations, it had become part of medicine, part of religion, part of social life, and part of human culture. But the biggest turning point in this story was still waiting, because this ancient tradition was about to become one of the largest industries the world had ever seen. When did ancient humans start smoking? But this is where the story takes its biggest turn. For thousands of years, many societies used smoke for limited purposes. It was part of religious ceremonies, healing practices, and important rituals. It wasn't something people did every day. It was treated with respect and used only on special occasions. But over time, everything changed. When European explorers arrived in the Americas in 1492, they encountered tobacco for the very first time. At first, it seemed like a strange and unfamiliar tradition, but curiosity quickly took over. Before long, Europeans began trying it themselves. Slowly, tobacco spread across Europe. Then it spread across the rest of the world. Within just a few centuries, something that had once been part of sacred ceremonies had become a global business. By the 17th and 18th centuries, tobacco farming was expanding rapidly. Merchants realized that demand continued to grow. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and machines made it possible to produce millions of cigarettes faster than ever before. Smoking was no longer limited to ceremonies or rituals. It had become an everyday habit. By the 20th century, the tobacco industry had grown into one of the most powerful industries in the world. Advertisements portrayed cigarettes as symbols of success, confidence, and modern living. Movie stars appeared on screen with cigarettes in their hands. People were encouraged to believe that smoking was fashionable, sophisticated, and completely normal. But behind the scenes, scientists were discovering a very different story. As research continued, evidence showed that long-term tobacco use could seriously damage the lungs, the heart, and many other parts of the human body. Gradually, governments and health organizations began warning the public about the risks of smoking. Public awareness campaigns spread across the world, warning labels appeared on cigarette packages, and people slowly began to understand the health consequences of tobacco use. This is what makes the entire story so fascinating. A behavior that may have begun with simple human curiosity, that later became part of sacred ceremonies, and was even used in traditional medicine by some ancient cultures, eventually transformed into one of the largest commercial industries in human history. The plant remained the same, but the way humans used it changed dramatically. So let's return to our original question.
When did ancient humans actually begin smoking? The honest answer is, we simply don't know. Archaeology gives us evidence that goes back thousands of years, but it's entirely possible that humans were experimenting with smoke much earlier. After all, our relationship with fire stretches back nearly 1 million years. Perhaps someone noticed a particular plant burning in a campfire. Perhaps they experienced an unusual feeling afterward. Maybe they decided to burn that same plant again. And perhaps that single moment of curiosity became the beginning of one of humanity's oldest traditions. We'll probably never know the name of the very first person who intentionally inhaled smoke. We'll never know the exact day it happened. But one thing seems increasingly clear. Humanity's relationship with smoke is far older than civilization, far older than agriculture, and even older than written history itself. So the next time you find yourself sitting beside a campfire, watching sparks rise into the night sky, or catching the familiar scent of burning wood, take a moment to think about it. Not thousands, but perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, our ancestors were sitting around fires just like this. They watched the same flames. They breathed the same smoke. And somewhere along that long journey, the story of humanity and smoke quietly began. A story that, in many ways, still hasn't reached its final chapter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy exploring the hidden stories of history, science, and ancient civilizations, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next journey into humanity's incredible past.